Welcome, everybody. Hello. Thank you for taking your lunch hour to join the AMA Phoenix. We really appreciate it. And we have a great topic and a great speaker today. I know we are all excited, so welcome. I want to very quickly just do a little housekeeping item. So I would like to thank our sponsors. We just are so appreciative of our sponsors who have, especially ones that have been with us for quite a while. They make everything we do possible. And I would particularly like to point out Financial Potion and Taylor Wellman, who is our host. She is the person who brings these webinars to us, and it's been tremendous working with her. If you have video needs, please consider giving Taylor a call. And we would also like to thank our supporters. These are the companies who employ our board members, our AMA board members. We put a lot of time and energy into this organization, and having the support of our companies means a lot, and it makes a big difference so we can get doing what we need to get doing. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our speaker, Jessica Delgado. We are very excited to have her here speaking on a topic we really have not touched yet here at the AMA in terms of presentations. So we're very excited to welcome Jessica. Jessica is championing, I don't know if I've said the word right, but being from New Jersey, I have a couple of words that I get stuck on, and my husband always makes fun of me with that. But we're talking about today diversity, equity, and inclusion, and what we as marketers can do and have to do these days. You know, back in the old days, and when I say old days, I even mean probably 2 years ago, these might be topics that we wouldn't want to touch, and that is not the case today. So we are really happy to have a person speaking on DEI who is a champion of this. So Jessica, welcome, and we're going to give you the floor. We really appreciate you taking the time with us, and look forward to your presentation.
Awesome. Well, thank you for that introduction. I am going to go ahead and share so we can get this show on the road. All right. Well, a few additional housekeeping things I want to make sure to mention. There's a ton of resources that I've littered this presentation with, videos and questions and polls. And so while we may not get to all of that today, I do want to point them out that you will get this presentation after the fact. And so if you want to tap into any of those resources, you'll have access to that. And then, of course, we're also recording, so you'll have that to point to as well. So just curious, I want to get some engagement going here. I've got a question for everyone. So who's attended a DEI or DI training or something of the sorts? Go ahead and enter something in the chat room. Some examples might be yes, internally at work, or I'm learning on my own. I'm doing work on my own and also at work. I always like to get a feel for folks' background. So I'll give everyone a quick second to go ahead and enter something in the chat. And then before we dive in any further, I also want to share a thank you to the AMA team for bringing us all together today. You know, if there's one thing that we know about, if there's one thing that we know about advancing diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEI as it's lovingly known, it's that it requires conversations, right? And it requires the opportunity to do work. And that's exactly what we can do here today. So thank you to the AMA team for bringing us all together. So I just remembered that I'm not going to be able to actually see the chat while I do that back and forth. So thank you for entering that, responding to that question. I'll make sure to take a look at that. But for those of you who have experienced DEI work, thank you for joining and continuing your work in this space. I welcome you to share your learnings with others so that we can collectively grow. I by no means have all of the answers. And so I want to make sure that we honor the power of the collective. And then for those of you who are new to this work, welcome to the journey. This is going to require an ongoing commitment. And if you stick with it, you're going to be contributing to not only creating a more informed marketing world, but to the greater good of our world, right?
I thought about taking
that. Let's continue. And I'm hearing some chat, so I want to check in and make sure that I maybe want to pause for a question or curiosity, or was that just someone's mic on? Okay, I think that was probably someone's mic on. All right, so we got an iceberg here. So our time today is a mile wide and an inch deep. You know, this is a journey, again, that we're all on. So one session, 60 minutes or so, it's just the beginning, right? And so I want to encourage you, and you'll hear me say this over and over again, continue your learnings and practice being brave in this space. So our goals for today, you know, not necessarily marketing driven, right? This will all result in strength in marketing, but really our goals for today are about mindsets and awareness. And so this is our starting point. And we're going to engage in some activities that I'm hoping you really dive into, because for this work to work, you have to work. So I'm going to ask you to really immerse yourself and be fully engaged. So pause the notifications, take a break from checking what's going on in politics, and really try to be present. My hope today is that it's a catalyst of sorts for you to begin doing the work day in and day out to create the habits that are necessary for change. And so again, a quick reminder, if anyone's joined, I can't actually tell, but this, again, the presentation is, there's videos and chats and polls and whatnot, but given today's timing, we're a little stretched. And so we're not necessarily going to engage very deeply with all those elements. So during any silent portions, I want to ask you to also see that and use that as a reflection opportunity. And again, as a reminder, you'll get all of this via email, so you can follow up and do some additional reflecting. Okay, so let's keep going. Oh, here we go. All right, so speaking of icebergs, let's get warmed up with an icebreaker type of puzzle. So if you got a piece of paper or something to write on, go ahead and grab that really quickly. And if you've seen this before, don't chat about it, just bear with us as we engage. And so my challenge for you, and again, we're thinking about our mindsets here, right? My challenge for you here is to link all 9 of these dots using 4 straight lines or less, without lifting your pen and without retracing any of the lines. And so I can see some faces. And so if you even want to try like using your finger across the screen, so like little brain teaser. We won't spend too much time here, but I'll give you another second or so to try to get your links going. All right. So here are 2 common approaches that don't quite make the cut. So if we look at approach 1, follow along. You see the logic with the numbers, right? You go down 1 across the 2 up to, but we're neglecting the center dot. And then we look at approach 2, getting creative there with the diagonal, right? So anyways, if you've tried any other approaches besides these 2, go ahead and chat about it. We can do some engaging in this space about how other folks have gotten creative. But I don't want to leave everyone scratching their heads in regards to the solution, so we will get to that. But again, go ahead and share with each other if you've got any other creative ideas. And so here's one of those moments where I said I included a video, but we're not actually going to watch it. But again, if you'll have the link later if you're super curious. So my point here with this brain teaser icebreaker kind of activity is to begin to get you to think outside of the box. And in this case, you think outside of the box and the solution quite literally points you in the right direction. So the solution is the arrow that you see there. And when you watch the video later, it'll walk you through how to actually navigate the dots so that you end up with that. And so with the approaches I shared, those 2 examples that you seen on the previous slide, I may have been conditioning you to think inside the box, but really this is all about thinking outside of the box. And so again, the solution points you in the right direction. So let's get outside of our boxes. Let's do another one. So this is really pretty straightforward. And again, I want to encourage you to do some chatting with each other, even though I can't engage in that space. So simple question, what do you see? So go ahead and take a second. What do you see? And I'm hoping that we'll hear about two options. Maybe a tree stump. No, I'm just joking. There's no tree stump, folks. What we should probably be looking for are most common answers, a duck and a bunny. Now my point here, oh, I'm so sorry. I did an advance for you guys. I gave you the answer. So what you see here are typically either a duck or a bunny. And I threw in a tree stump to try to mix things up, but really there's no tree stump. But really, again, this is just a fun way to begin to illustrate that there's more than one way to look at things. And I want us to begin to challenge ourselves and our existing mindsets. Do you believe that it's your way or the highway? Do you acknowledge the perspective of others? So I know I can't see the chat, but I'm hoping that there's some back and forth going on there. But again, are you acknowledging what other folks are seeing or what other approaches people are taking? Do you fiercely uphold your perspectives, or do you leave room in your mind to try to see what someone else does or where someone else is coming from? So while these puzzles are really fun and novice, they signal how we all have blind spots and even limited perspectives, right? We all do this. It's natural. This is a result of, literally evolution. And so we need to be able to make snap decisions, but we also need to be able to slow down and unpack other perspectives. So during today's session, do some check-ins on where your mindset is and make sure you're considering other perspectives, right? This is just a great starting point for us. And with that in mind, let's continue to community agreements. And I forgot to mention that I've got several screens open. And so I'm trying my best to look at you, but if there's ever a point where I'm kind of like looking off, just bear with me. So again, community agreement. So today, while we've got our marketing hats on, right? But we're going to be discussing and examining diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI. And this work, it pulls at our emotions, right? And if we want a truly safe environment in which to learn and grow, then we're going to have to make some agreements to each other about how we're going to work together. So let's do a little bit of chatting again. You're getting the feel for my typical type of presentation where I really enjoy chat engagement. So in the chat, if you've experienced this, and again, I apologize, we're not actually going to respond to any of that, but I am curious for after the fact, what are community agreements? Why are they important? And then if you have any community agreements that you typically use in your work environments or that you'd like to suggest up for today, then we'll make sure to leverage those. But some of my favorite community agreements are speak from the heart, especially when it's a conversation like this, right? If we really want to have authentic conversations, then we've got to be honest and speaking from that place. So anyways, I'm hoping that we've got some community agreements going in the chat and that you all are reviewing those. But this is really just about setting our conversation up for success and knowing that we're all going to approach this respectfully. So, and another takeaway, if you do model any of this work in your spaces, is that you cannot have a safe space until all stakeholders are committed to a set of practices that allows them to speak their truths. And setting up community agreements is one way to help make that happen. So we are now going to transition to a really basic, but really, I find an impactful activity that will highlight the power that we have as marketers. And so again, this is, I mentioned earlier in the presentation that there may be these moments of silence, and this is going to be one of those reflective opportunities. And a quick note, this is also an activity modified from a TED Talk hosted by Damien Hooper, that, yeah, his name's on the slide there. And so it's not my activity, but I heard it and I love it, and I enjoy sharing it. So let's jump right in. But remember, you only get in, you only get out what you put in. So again, try to really immerse yourself in this experience. So dive in with me. So what do we see here? We look at this image, right? And again, typically, if you want to do some chatting, we can do some engagement in that space. So, you know, a child, a group of children, one's excluded, you know, that's generally the type of conversation that gets going here, right? And so I want you all to immerse yourself into a personal memory when you felt excluded. And just think about it, remember it, any of the senses that you can recall, try to really bring it to life in your memory. And we're just going to sit with that memory where you felt excluded. And if you're so inclined, this would require some vulnerability, right? If you're so inclined to share any of those experiences that you may have just recalled in the chat, then I invite you to share. So these are likely not positive experiences, right? Bottom line is, it's no fun to be excluded, right? Those memories, I would challenge anyone who said that their exclusionary memories are ones that they think of fondly, right? This is not rocket science. We have all at one point or another experienced exclusion, whether as a child or as a professional. You know, there's all sorts of scenarios, right? So let's do this again, but with a twist. Memory lane round 2. So I want to challenge you now to immerse yourself in a personal memory or a professional memory where you felt celebrated, connected, part of the team. And I want you to think about the adjectives that describe how you felt. What was it that made you feel that way? So again, let's sit in silence here and just do some reflecting. All right. So these are likely those fond memories that I said we didn't have in the last slide, right? These are the memories that we like to recall and point to, right? Positive experiences. And so what we've just experienced, or a modified version of what we've just experienced, is the foundation of the I in DEI, inclusion. So inclusion is one of our gold standards. It's our arrow. If we think back on the activity with the dots, right? It's our arrow that points us in the right direction. And the purpose of this particular activity is to highlight what could be the heart of our conversation today. Everything we do as marketers is either going to be inclusive or not. And we've just experienced, or you've just experienced in those personal and professional memories you took yourself through, what both sides feel like. And so our challenge is to use this filter to do our work. You know, as marketers, we shape one of two very distinct experiences. And unless you've been living under a rock, you know that our country has been experiencing a lot of turmoil, right? And if you practice using that in and out lens, right, from this last activity where we were calling on those memories, then you know that a lot of people in society are feeling excluded. So we know that inclusion, again, is good and exclusion is bad, but I wanted you to call on those memories so that you could begin, again, this is only the beginning, so that you could begin to feel what it's like, because the way to become more inclusive is to develop empathy. I know we've all heard empathy over and over again this year, right? Empathy is one of those 2020 words. And we also want to begin to practice curiosity, right? So let's take a look at DEI. All right, so this is really fundamental, right? And obviously key to our learning today. This is DEI. So let's look at each one. Diversity asks who's in the room. Equity asks who is trying to get in but can't. And inclusion asks, have everyone's ideas been heard? And there's lots of versions of this, and I'll share some different versions as we move forwards. But understanding this, practicing this is the foundation, right? This is diversity, again, like this level 1 here. Diversity, likely the easiest because we can mandate it, right? Equity, we're getting a little more tricky, right? Because it requires us to examine the systems and structures that we have in place and then change those systems and structures. It requires a deeper commitment. And lastly, inclusion, again, our gold standard, what we're really working towards, this is going to push us towards everyone belonging. And it's very challenging to do this work because it does require shifts. And the most difficult shift to make it this way is our mindset. And so that's why you hear me often talk about mindset. So let's look at some additional example. Here's another look at equity and inclusion. Looking at different graphics that address the same topic, it helps bring concepts to life, and you never know which version is going to resonate with someone. So I like to share lots of different examples. And when I've shared this previously, I've gotten some pushback, again, I know everyone's not a fan of this, but again, you never know what's going to resonate and help bring concepts to life for folks. And so I still enjoy sharing it because you begin to wrap your head around some of the concept, right? And so this is just going to get us thinking about what we're working towards. So take a look and examine each of the images here. Really looking at our reality. I think the reality one is probably the most catching, right? Kind of looks like perhaps our current reality, and maybe highlights the disproportionate allocation of resources, lack of attention and consideration, and then inclusion, obviously removing all barriers to access. But really, I think one of the points that I've heard some folks make about the inclusion piece is rather getting those folks into the seats, get those folks into the stands. So anyways, I get lots of feedback. So if you've got any feedback on this image, I'd love to hear it, because I'm always looking for new graphics to help bring concepts to life. And so let's take another pause here. And I'd like for you to think for a second about your role as a marketer. Let's ask ourselves some questions, right? What do you see, or who do you see? Who do you see when you do your work? And do you really see them? Are you on the other side of the fence looking into their eyes? Like how do you know that you're seeing them? And so that makes me think of another question. Who are you reaching or not reaching? How are you reaching them? The how, that's a deep one, because you may be doing things in your how that are completely irrelevant to reaching that audience, right? So that how, don't neglect that. And another question, do you really know? Do you really care? So these are just reflection questions for us to consider as we do our work. Let's look at another one. All right. So this version is just matter of fact, right? Our country, let's be honest, has practiced these behaviors for hundreds of years. And if we're on a journey towards inclusion, then we've got to be aware of the pitfalls. And so these are essentially 4 strategies that we've prototyped. And we know from history that exclusion and segregation don't work, right? I don't think I'm going to hear any objections there. And we're sort of test driving integration with diversity models, but we know in our hearts of heart that that's not going to work, right? What gives us the greatest hope for change is inclusion. And as marketers, I really believe this is what we need to work towards. And so way to get to inclusion is by leveraging our power as marketers, as we have probably the largest platform, the most abundant resources to create change, right? We're the artists and the scientists. What a combination. And so we're also part of a workforce that has tremendous reach. And so, you know, if our workforce was an Instagram account, and you'll hear me talk a lot about social media later in the presentation, you know, we'd have a lot of followers. So I just want us to think about the power that we have, right? So, you know, what happens in the workforce impacts social mass. And so we can't undermine or neglect the value that we bring to the opportunity to make change for our country. And so with that, I want to share this incredible quote. Those who tell the stories don't just rule the world, they can change it. And this is who we are and the power we have as marketers, plain and simple. And so we can kick off a conversation and start really getting to know our teams, really getting to know our clients, and have, like I mentioned earlier, the courage to authentically engage. Imagine how much more powerful our stories can be, how much more impactful our work could be. All right, so let's begin to bring this to life and look at an example. So P&G, or Procter & Gamble, heard loud and clear from a community that they were doing business with. And P&G, you know, huge company, they do business with a lot of communities. They heard from a community that was important to them, that there was a conversation that needed to happen. And so this is, we're not going to actually watch it, but this is one of those teasers. This is one of those videos that you can watch after as you continue your learning journey. But this is a commercial. I'm trying to think of how to frame it without giving it away, because it's incredible. It's powerful. It's moving. You may cry. They sought to be more inclusive by addressing the experiences of a community that they wanted to work with. And so if we think about the 4 strategies that we just checked out, right? Exclusion, segregation, integration, and inclusion, you know, there are all of those elements. P&G brought them all into their demonstration here. And so this is P&G saying to a community that I hear you, I see you, I want to be part of the change. They're saying, I don't want to exclude you. This is good business, right? But more importantly, again, you know, I think it's important that we keep our marketing hats on, but most importantly, that we do the right thing, right? And that's what P&G did here. They did the right thing. We know that today's consumer is socially responsible, and consumers are looking for values-based brands. And so, you know, if we put our business lens on and we're looking for money, right? Well, then we need to make sure that we're aligning ourselves appropriately, because again, consumers want to spend their money with values-based companies that have a heart. And so here's your first of many teasers. I hope you check out this video. And another plug, I have one other example for P&G later in the presentation. And P&G has an entire library of race videos on their YouTube channel, and they tackle race, and then they have several other topics that they've tackled with several spots. And so I encourage you to check out their YouTube channel. It is robust and it is moving. So again, socially responsible buyers are looking for value via company character. This is what the data says. You know, I'm not here to bombard you with that data about the marketing case or even the business case for doing this work, but it exists. And here's one piece, right? Consumers want to spend their money with companies with progressive values. 80% of Americans would purchase a product from a company that advocated for an issue they cared about, while 88 would boycott a company that they thought behaved irresponsibly. / cancel culture, right? Danger zone. So we're also all surely familiar with Toms and Bombas, the shoes and socks, the one-for-one mission, values-based companies, right? I feel like Toms and Bombas were maybe two of the originals, probably not originals, but two of the first really mainstream companies to live and put their company heart forward, right? So we've heard a lot about inclusion to this point, and we know it's our gold star, but let's be real. We all might want to do this, but we're not yet there. So let's do some more reflecting, right? All right, so an important point, a point for us again to think about our community agreements, right? We want to have an authentic conversation. We want to be honest with ourselves and each other. Whatever the community agreements, this is a slide that would require you to point to your community agreements if you did this with a team, right? And reminding your team that this is not a judgment call. This is just a tool, right? It's just a check-in opportunity for you to consider where you might be now and where you want to be instead. So essentially, let's take a look at this matrix. What we're looking at is inclusive behaviors with the champion and the newbie, and then those who don't yet see the value, right? And so if we were all champions, we wouldn't be here today, right? So it's important for us to be honest with ourselves about where we are, and it's ebb and flow. As we learn, we may get frustrated, and again, it's just, let's honor the real experiences of doing this work. And so this is another, hello, I see some more video cameras turning on. So anyways, this is another reflection moment. Take a few seconds, read some of the descriptions there. And if you'd like to, via the chat, share where you think you're at and why, or what your goal is and why, or what might be missing for you and why. This is an important reflection point. And I understand that this is sensitive, and I really want you to just take this with you, knowing that you can leverage it personally and with your teams, or create a version that you find would work better with for you or your team. But that's self-assessment is really key. So now that we've hopefully started to locate ourselves using tools like this, and again, doing lots of reflections, probably one of my keywords for today, then the question becomes, how do we get to where we want to go? And more importantly, who's responsible for it? I always get a kick out of this. So as organizations do the work towards advancing diversity, equity, and inclusion, who has the most responsibility? So I want to literally ask you that question. Let's go to the chat. So whose responsibility is it to advance DEI in the workplace? Is it HR? Is it leadership? Maybe there's a DEI team that can handle it, or is there some other entity? So if you've got some insights, go ahead and put it in the chat. I'm always curious about what folks have to say. And this is a more controversial point of discussion, or it has been in some of my other presentations, because when this wheel starts spinning, right, when we start sinking our teeth into this work, and something goes wrong, well, our instinct, our fear tells us that, okay, we need to play the blame game, right? There have been some folks who I've worked with, and they want someone solely to be responsible. And I tend to disagree with that, right? I believe that this work at a department, at an organizational level, is something that everyone needs to come together to do and learn from. So let's continue our journey in this space. So setting our teams up for success. So that question I just asked you previously, that I hope you responded to in the chat, that was a trick question, right? Again, my practice, my belief is that I believe this is everyone's responsibility. I believe in the power of the collective. There are all sorts of testimonials, quotes, even data that discuss the strength and impact that emerges when teams come together. And that's illustrated by this lovely quote I shared here. And so typically these initiatives are top down, but when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion, we need all of the stakeholders at the table. And this sounds like common sense, right? Or maybe not, but it is really a fundamental piece, because if you're about inclusion, then we have to devote the time, energy, and resources to make it happen. And if you don't, well, then maybe you're not about inclusion. But when companies don't come together, that is risky business. And we'll look at what happens in the marketing world when that mismatch emerges. So let's take a look. Oh, this is just one quick comment before we take a look at that. I wanted to remind us to keep something in mind. You've heard me say journey a lot, and that's true. And engaging in this work is a journey. And while we may be tempted at times to play the blame game or to want to point to one person being responsible for leading us on this journey, we need to remember that as much this journey is about failure as well. We need to get comfortable failing. And so that's one of the key points that I wanted to make here. And it's not enough to keep learning and not applying. So several, when all of this emerged and there was this urgency to begin to have these discussions, we started hearing became very common very quickly to see and read statements of solidarity. And then we started hearing folks going, I'm on a learning journey, I'm on a journey, I'm learning, I'm practicing. But that was great. And that was sufficient temporarily. The space that we're in now requires application, right? It's not enough to keep learning and not applying. Our practices, our policies, our work across the board, it needs to be updated so that we're ensuring its inclusivity. So again, let's go back to some of those examples I was talking about. What's at risk when we don't have inclusive teams? So when our teams are not set up for success, and they don't come together the way that they should, we're gonna see some interesting work out there. So here's another teaser. I'm not sure if everyone's familiar or not with the Pepsi ad heard around the world that was littered with isms. Again, when you get this presentation after today, you'll have the link to check out the entire thing. It's quite long, but it's filled with isms, and that's all I'll say. I don't want to give you any more of a teaser than that. So you can see some of the uproar. This is just one example, but if you're curious, you could check out Twitter and just see, post after post, right? How does no one involved in the creative process here recognize the expletive here? Hire Black people, plain and simple, right? So the response to Pepsi producing this was, Pepsi, I don't feel heard. Pepsi, I don't feel seen. This is offensive. You've excluded me. You've excluded my community. No. And so if you think about in terms of the activity that we did earlier, the teams responsible in this example were only seeing one perspective, one potential response to this commercial. And we know that fell flat. And so, yeah, I really appreciate, although it's, it has that expletive, I really appreciate that tweet there. Hire Black people. It really cuts to the chase, right? We cannot move towards inclusivity if we don't have diversity. And the bottom line is that you need to diversify your teams, right? And if you're not seeing Black and brown marketers collaborating on your teams, then that should be a red flag. So let's look at some additional examples. All right, so we've got my upper left here. Bedrock is a Detroit commercial real estate firm that put out a very large scale ad campaign that was not at all inclusive of all Detroiters. I'm not exactly sure why we want to see such a homogenous view of Detroit. And then we've got Nivea and Dove, both of consumer packaged goods, very, very narrowly defining cleanliness and beauty. And so again, as marketers, we're the artists, we're the scientists as well. And so we got to think about our imagery. We've got to think about our text. We've got to have our pulse on a lot of pieces, right? And so if we again put on our lens from earlier, where we can practice our gift of perspective, the storytellers in these spaces did not consider alternate perspectives of how their audiences would feel as a result of these campaigns, right? This is also a consequence of not engaging a diverse team. Like I said earlier, the diverse team and an inclusive environment to determine the quality of marketing. And so again, we need to ask ourselves as we do our work, is what I'm saying and doing and putting out there in my marketing perpetuating racism, social injustice? And so I want to ask all of you to think about your specific work, another opportunity for some reflection here, and ask yourself that hard question. Am I creating or supporting racist content? It's a painful question, but we've got to get comfortable being uncomfortable and addressing that ugly truth. So here's another set of questions that we won't necessarily dive into, but just some reflection points. Does your business or organization have a strategic marketing plan or something of the sorts? Does that plan include diversity, equity, and inclusion in some way, shape, or form? And is your team talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion? And if you're so inclined, I invite you to, again, share some responses or thoughts in the chat. I always find it helpful to have that feedback after the presentation, just to go through and keep my pulse on different scenes. And so just, again, some questions to consider. All right, so how else can we be more responsible as marketers? We can plan. You're probably getting to that, why is she asking me those questions? Well, I'm a big planner, and so I believe in strategic planning. And while this is not a strategic planning session, I'm not going to get into details about what your plan, what your plan needs to look like. My point here is that our teams need to think and put the work, time, energy, and resources in to advance diversity, equity, and inclusion. It can't be something on the back burner. And so as you move into planning, there are some considerations I'd like to share. And so let's go through these. So first, start having conversations with your colleagues. This doesn't have to be complicated, but moving towards inclusion and belonging begins with us being vulnerable and curious. Create and clarify values. So this is looking at your current strategy and all that diversity, equity, inclusion encompasses, and that's a lot. And at the end of this presentation, we'll begin to more deeply unpack some of that. And so you can begin to consider how you're going to take a stand or not, and educate employees on those said values and how to practice them, assessing the varying awareness and gaps. There are real life consequences to our employees not understanding and practicing diversity, equity, and inclusion. And this is not a gimmick. And so if you make a commitment in this space, it is going to require work, time, resources of everyone involved. Again, the power of the collective does not fall on just one person. So, and then lastly, create content that is in line with said values. And so let's look at some examples of organizations that have been strategic. And so here's another teaser, folks. You're going to have lots of videos to check out this weekend. This is an example from Nike. And I know that Nike is not without controversy, but when it comes to social justice, when it comes to racism, they have a history of taking a stand. They have a very obvious set of values that are practiced by their teams, by their entire company, right? They have a plan that guides their ongoing work in this space. So I invite you after the presentation to take a look at one of their spots. This was their latest spot at the time. There may be something, I think there actually is something out that's newer now, but again, just like P&G, Nike has a very robust set of content on YouTube that I would encourage you to check out. It's about a 1-minute video that really illustrates over and over again that the company is very strategic and has a plan around this work. So let's look at some more examples. All right, so on the flip side, when you don't plan, right, these are some examples of a weak or no plan perhaps, or even inconsistent values. You heard me talk about values just a minute ago. So let's unpack why, because I bet some of you are surprised to see Starbucks on there. Maybe not. So back in 2018, we heard about some racist Starbucks employees, and Starbucks said, hey, that's not what we're about. That's not in line with our brand, and we need to do better. And so they hosted a racial bias training, and that said to the world and said to their employees specifically that Starbucks, that we value diversity, equity, and inclusion, and we're going to do the work to help our employees get educated. So that was, yeah, like right on, Starbucks, it's great. But then fast forward to 2020, not too long ago. I don't see, I guess when I screenshotted this, I took the date off, but this is not long ago at all. Starbucks tells its employees that they cannot wear anything that supports Black Lives Matter. Whoa, whoa, whoa. It's kind of in direct opposition from what you were saying in 2018, right? So employees, when that news broke that they couldn't represent Black Lives Matters, there was a frenzy that happened, right? Employees, celebrities, everyone was in an uproar about this, and rightly so, because in 2018, you said and did something to begin tackling racism, and now you're blocking employees from being advocates. What the heck? So obviously you can see here, this was quickly reversed, and they wrote a letter, or Starbucks wrote a letter, they posted, they even designed a t-shirt, which is the image in the very bottom section. So the t-shirt. But what happened here, right? What is with all this mix and match, right? This was their plan. This is evidence of their plan being out of whack. This is evidence of inconsistent values, right? And their employees are actually still practicing toxic behavior. So the other example I have on this slide is an example from the latest incident where the woman here received her drink with ISIS on it. Come on, what's going on? So yeah, this is just Starbucks. They've got some alignment to do, right? They've got some strategic planning to think about, perhaps. So the NFL on the other side of the slide. So, with the NFL's history, and now coming out and admitting they were wrong, everyone was like, wow, incredible, right? And now they're even working with the Native American community or the Native American populations to make changes to names for at least one team. That's a great sign, right? Have they got a new set of values driving their work? Time will tell. So all this is to say that as marketers, we often are at the very tables when it comes to brand work. And we can leverage our sphere of influence to help our teams do better so that we're practicing inclusion. My last point on this particular section is I want us to understand what's at stake. When we don't get strategic, when we don't re-examine our values and our practices around diversity, equity, and inclusion, what happens? Our marketing becomes trendy. And trends are fun and great in the moment, right? But it's in one day and out the next. It's tokenism, right? And so here's an example. We've got the incredible Black Lives Matter street art display and a comment about only one state to date addressing the systemic challenges that are actually being upheld. So I'll give you all a second to read through that. So as marketers, we have to remember that this is not about creating hype. This is not some moment. This is about creating impact. So let's look at some key takeaways. So first, some people know more than others, right? There's a spectrum of awareness, and that's okay. And if we can make these considerations as we do our work, then we're going to make progress in our diversity, equity, and inclusion work. And so I'm just going to give you a minute to read these for yourselves. And these are all things that we've highlighted on previous slides, so nothing new here. And I'm also checking in on timing. Let's see. Okay. All right, let's go ahead and transition. So yeah, just some key takeaways to consider. All right, you heard me mention earlier that this, hundreds of years, no surprise, right? So this is not a history class, but I do want to say that slavery, racism existed for 400 years. And let me be clear that while this topic is as prevalent as ever, there are also other topics and people that are excluded that we need to know about and address as marketers. Remember, today's consumers are very conscious about the brands that they engage with. And so marketers who are seeking that deep engagement with audiences need to understand and acknowledge communities' realities. And so with that, I want us to look at the scope of some of the topics in the DEI, or diversity, equity and inclusion space. Okay, so these are all, take it in, these are all topics of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so earlier when I talked about deciding if you were committed to this work, I was asking if you were committed to all of this, right? It's a pretty robust list. There's a lot here. And as marketers, we probably should learn about all of this, as again, it likely impacts our audience work. And it's a business imperative. And knowing the experiences of all groups of people and including them in our work, it's just the right thing to do. You've heard me say that several times. This is the right thing to do. And so really quickly, each of these topics has their own related vocabulary and set of practices. And so if we want to be inclusive, if we want to be anti-racist, then this is our responsibility, right? Now what we're seeing happen a lot of times is teams being developed around diversity, equity, inclusion. Because again, it's not that they're the ones that are going to be solely responsible for doing this work, but to unpack all of this, to engage the broader organization and company, we do need a team to support that. Because again, it can be a lot. So here are some, not all, keywords to race, ethnicity, and racism, mostly of our topic today, right? This is our stake in the game. And if you believe in and want to do this work, then here's another takeaway to unpack, right? Use this list to begin having conversations with people, right? I had mentioned earlier to start talking to your own colleagues and being vulnerable and asking, Black or African American, right? Just opening yourself up to having uncomfortable conversations, or what might seem to be uncomfortable conversations. And so I'll even point to a few of these words that were actually recently new to me as a Latina. And that reminded me that while I do have a very particular lived experience, I still have work to do myself. No one is exempt from learning and growing in this space. And so some of the words I'll point to are BIPOC, that first one up there, that's Black, Indigenous, people of color. This is a more inclusive term. Next, right underneath that is BAME, B-A-M-E. It's Black, Asian, Minority, Ethnic. And this one emerged in the UK, given it was more representative of their audiences. Untapped, that's a little bit farther down the list. And this just speaks to the untapped potential of ethnic minority in communities. And I've also included in the comments of this presentation some links that really dive into some of the very general definitions that I'm sharing, about untapped, for example. And the last one, melting pot and salad bowl, it's essentially the conversation around assimilation versus acculturation. So besides conversations which are really get you that personal insight, I've also shared some of my favorite resources for you to leverage and read if you're so interested. Quick check on time. I think we're doing okay. Okay, so here's another suggested list of ways to engage a variety of communities. I'm going to point to a slide in just a second about social media, and a lot of my resources. I'm very into digital spaces and social media, is on the top of most of my lists. And I have one account that I'd love to point to, but a lot of these resources, a lot of my learning has happened very informally on Instagram, for example. And so if you find yourself more comfortable in some spaces over others, then I guarantee you that searching a hashtag on LinkedIn or searching up certain accounts on Instagram will help you along on your learning journey. So again, this is just another example of the work of the suggested workflow coming from the actual community, right? You don't have to guess. This is already out there. And here's another one. So if you think about the process perhaps for doing this work beyond strategic planning, this is just one sample I've come across that, really, really simplifies the outline for creating engagement. This is definitely more engagement internally, but just another incredible example. Okay, a few more key takeaways. This is another, yes, you can see that it's a video and you'll have the access after the presentation. This is another video. And as we begin to wrap up, I wanted us to look at an example of, well, we talked about P&G, but they're the example of a company that models all three of our key takeaways, right? They leverage their sphere of influence to do just that, to influence. And so, this P&G ad is another moving spot, and it includes an actual call to action, and it challenges viewers to do something. And when you watch the video, you will, I'm sure, be moved, but also you'll see their call to action. A little plug there. And as we wrap today up and begin thinking about questions, I want to end with a few quotes that speak to us as marketers and as people looking to do the right thing. So the Toni Morrison quote, this is borrowed actually from another AMA presentation a while ago, but I thought it was so fitting for our conversation today. And she tells us, this is precisely the time when artists go to work. There is no time for despair, no place for self-pity, no need for silence, no room for fear. We speak, we write, we do language. That is how civilizations heal. How fitting, right? I talked earlier about marketers being the artists and the scientists, and I feel like that's exactly what she's describing here. Time for work, right? And the other, I'm a big Trevor Noah fan, and he had the late Representative John Lewis on his show, and he says, racism is an ongoing struggle. It's not a struggle that lasts for a few days, a few weeks, a few months, or a few years. It is the struggle of a lifetime, maybe many lifetimes, but you must give it all. We must continue to move our feet, continue to push and pull, not just to make America better, but to make our planet a little better. Both talking about the big picture there. And so, quick side note, the late Congressman Lewis had an incredible Instagram. If anyone is interested, he tirelessly educated and advocated. So if you're so inclined, please check that out. So we've got a framework of sorts now to do this work, right? And my hope is that you're going to decide to continue to commit yourself to this work, because it is an ongoing journey, and ask yourself, are you going to maintain the status quo, or are you going to do something about it? The relationship between diversity, equity, and inclusion and marketing is not only a business imperative, but again, it's the right thing to do. So one of the hopes I had for today was to really shift our mindsets, right? If we think back to that iceberg, and build that awareness and push us towards being more open and empathetic marketers. Because again, we can remember, based on our earlier activity, we know what being left out is like now, right? And we don't want to go there. And so again, you heard me mention Instagram a few times. And so here's Dynasty Hunt on Instagram. She raises some incredible points about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and she does it in a really eye-catching way, and these incredible short snippets. And so incredibly digestible, great insight. I would encourage you to check her out. Her latest post, I just wanted to quickly share: diversity and inclusion, not equity. So if we think back to that one image where, I always talk about inclusion being our gold star, but this conversation is about equity now. So it's a great post to unpack and consider. And also another reminder, we think back about that tweet I shared earlier, hire Black people. Well, the same, she's alluding to that with her comments here. Diversify your workplaces, essentially. So thank you. Let's keep the conversation going. I know we're going to move into some questions. And then if I don't get to them all, we can certainly keep the conversation alive on LinkedIn. I'm a big LinkedIn and Instagram advocate. So I'm going to invite you all to join me in those spaces. And I'm going to stop sharing so that we can check out some questions. Thank you all.
Excellent work, Jessica. Thank you so much. We do have a few questions that I have here, and please, everyone, as you're just absorbing all the information that Jessica shared, if you have any additional questions, please don't hesitate to put them in the chat. We do have time saved to answer these questions, and if we don't get to all of them, Jessica will then respond after. So
Gotcha.
One question that I have for you, are you finding that marketers and companies are reluctant to take a social stand in their marketing?
Oh, absolutely. So I just had a conversation with someone the other day about, and I was thinking about including it in this presentation, but I hesitated and didn't. Cancel culture. It's so scary, right? If we make, as marketers, if something goes wrong, there's so much at risk. And so that's part of where strategic planning comes in. Like, when you do that strategic planning and you've got the collective team at the table, you're going to make an agreement with each other about whether or not you're really committed to what's going to happen. You may fail. And is that okay with the leadership? Is that okay with the broader team? You've got to have some tough conversations because it is a reality. There is definitely reluctancy. There's also, there's this new cancel culture, because cancel culture removes the opportunity for learning, right? And so there's a new, I feel, and I've noticed a new resistance to cancel culture. So I think there's a little bit, or we're moving into a space where there's going to be less reluctancy because the fear of cancel culture, for example, is going to be lessened, because we do want to help people learn and grow. So yeah, that's certainly real, and that's a conversation that you've got to have with your team.
Excellent.
Failure's okay.
And so with that same idea, if a company doesn't agree with an issue, should they try to address it?
Well, that's, we think about the statements of solidarity that came out. Folks or organizations and companies were getting pretty crafty, right? And not in all cases did you see organizations say Black Lives Matter, right? The statements of solidarity were across the board. And so if the company or organization doesn't absolutely agree with the politics or with, whatever the nature of the situation is, I think that's okay. The point is that you gotta make your stance known, right? An example that I'll point to is, and this may be controversial, but Ford didn't actually say Black Lives Matter, but Ford did issue statements of solidarity. They just chose to omit that particular line. So anyways, there's ways to approach that. I hope that helps to clarify. But just taking a stand, letting your audiences know where you stand, it's almost demanded of our organizations these days.
And in the beginning, when you were talking about community agreements, there were a few crickets. I think that maybe most of us aren't aware of community agreements or what they are. So would you be able to expand on that a bit more?
Yeah, so, community agreements are all about beginning to set up a safe space, right? Just because you have, it's like that Instagram post we just looked at, just because you have a diverse team, just because everyone's at the table and may have the opportunity to speak, it doesn't necessarily mean I'm comfortable speaking up. It doesn't necessarily mean that there's inclusivity, right? And so community agreements is a team's way. Like, ideally, you'd want to facilitate that in a way where everyone's voice is heard. So you might have a board up. And so for those folks who are introverts, they could write something. Or you might do it in a way where, there's multiple ways to share. The point is to get everyone's voices heard. And what we want to hear from folks is, what can we do during this meeting, during this experience that is going to make you feel comfortable so that we can have a richer dialogue and advance this conversation. So like I said, my favorite that I always share is speak from the heart. That was a real challenge for me in my early professional career. I didn't feel like I could speak my truths. I couldn't share my authentic voice. And so speak from the heart became really important to me. And so I practiced that over and over again, and it allowed me to blossom into my professional spaces. And so that's just one example. But folks come up with all sorts when you provide that platform for them to share. I hope that helps.
Yes, definitely. And if this was maybe one of their first times attending something like this, what would you say would be a first step, or what would be kind of some action steps that you think people should take after watching all the videos that are going to be attached to your presentation?
Yeah, definitely the videos, versing yourself with the dialogue. You got to immerse yourself, right? You can't expect to just dive into a conversation unless you've got a friend or a colleague who is really tolerable to that, right? They're open to having those really foundational experiences with you. But remember, we can't rely on our Black and brown colleagues or friends to take that burden on, right? So that's why it's the responsibility of us to make sure that we get educated, so that when we do engage in these conversations, we are approaching it we're not being ignorant, right? We've done our homework. And so, really what you said, Taylor, check out the videos, check out the different articles, check out Instagram. There are so many avenues to be explored to help you get on this journey. I have some colleagues who were reading White Fragility, because they're really big into books, right? But all that to say, there's lots of palettes to consider, but I would definitely encourage you to start with doing your work first. You've got to get yourself set up for success so that you can engage in a dialogue in an informed way.
Excellent.
The last thing you want to do is offend anyone.
Of course. Yeah, that's the last thing you want to do. But also we've learned it's important to speak up and not stay silent.
That's right.
And so it's that nice blend that you need to figure out. And so in addition to Instagram, I know you mentioned P&G, you mentioned Nike. Who are other companies we should be looking at, or what are some other resources that you think people should be diving into in order to do more personal work?
Yeah. So one of my, somewhere in the presentation, I talked about we have to begin thinking about how we're going to strike that balance between being on a learning journey and also taking action. And so one of my favorite companies to point to that is taking action is Under Armour. So Under Armour, I forget the timeline, but very quickly they convened a team at the company level to make some policy changes. And so I don't have any of those details in front of me, but it's readily available. So they said by whatever year, we're going to have 25% Black board membership, or by this year we're going to have, they tied numbers to what they wanted to achieve. And so that was incredible. Under Armour, it's another large organization, so they have the resources and whatnot to pull together and make those decisions quickly. But small organizations and companies, we can be more nimble, right? We can certainly do stuff like that, make those types of commitments. So that's definitely my favorite.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Does anyone else have any questions that they just want to quickly add into the chat, or if you want to unmute yourself at this time to ask the question, feel free to do so. And everyone else is just thinking so much about everything that you've shared. And they're still trying to figure out the 4 lines. Everyone's still stuck on that.
Yeah. And thank you so much, Jessica. And what I will do, as soon as Jessica gives me the presentation, even without the video recording of the, of this webinar, I'll get that out like today or tomorrow. This way they can go and look at the videos that you referenced now, while it's fresh. But thank you very much, Jessica. I mean, this information was incredible. And again, I liked the questions that you asked, because I think if you take your marketing and you just ask these questions, do you acknowledge others? Do you not acknowledge other ways to look at things or consider other people's perspectives? That's, a very easy question to ask right in the beginning, before you do anything. Who is in the room? Who is trying to get in the room but cannot? How have everyone's ideas been heard? If you can think about that as you are beginning a campaign and beginning thoughts on how you promote your company or product, that would be a really good start. And then also, who do you see when you do your work? How are you reaching them? Do you really know? Do you really care? Again, if you can start with these questions, I think you'd be that much farther ahead as you progress in your campaigns and your marketing and your promotions.
Right.
So thank you very much. We really appreciate it. And I'm sure our audience looks forward to reviewing, once we give them the video, your presentation. But Jessica, thank you for taking the time with us.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to share this all with you all.
You are welcome. And then Nat, sorry.
Great job. Thank you so much for taking the time and sharing your knowledge with us.
Yeah, it was awesome. And then I just want to, on the screen, you see our next event is this coming Thursday. So 2 days from today. Kathy DeBoer, Senior Vice President at West Group Research. She will be discussing trends in market research and the state of survey data collection. Please join us for that, everyone. Knowing your customers and your audience is such an important aspect of what we do. This is going to be a really great event. And then you see the rest. We also have another October event, which is October 28th. And then a November and a December event. If you can believe, we're already talking about November and December, but hard to believe. Yeah. The year has gone really slow and really fast at the same time. And then just one last thank you to our sponsors. We appreciate their support. And again, if you have any video needs, please reach out to Taylor Wellman from Financial Potion. And we thank our supporters. Again, we can't get this all done without these companies being behind us. Keep an eye out on our website, amaphoenix.org, for future events and any other good information that you might need. But thank you for joining us for your lunch hour. And we are ending exactly at 1:15. So we made it. And we hope to see you all again soon. Have a great remainder of your day, everyone.